Hi guys! Tonight we explore a question that feels simple at first but slowly begins to open into something much deeper. You're standing at the edge of a land that has carried many names, many identities and many stories layered quietly on top of one another. A place that today is called Iran, but once was known to the world as Persia. And as you begin to move through its past, you start to sense that this change was never just about a name. It was about memory, power, language, belief, and the way people understand themselves across time. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, let me know where you are watching from and what time it is there right now. It is always fascinating to imagine how this story travels quietly across different parts of the world, reaching you wherever you are. Now dim the lights, and you begin. The air feels dry and still as you step into a landscape that stretches far beyond the limits of your vision. There are no modern borders here, no clear plains marking one nation from another. Instead, you find yourself in a vast region of mountains, plateaus and deserts, where early human communities have lived for thousands of years. This land, known broadly as the Iranian Plateau, has always been more than just a place. It is a crossroads where ideas, people and cultures meet and slowly blend. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that long before the word Iran existed, groups of people speaking early Indo-Iranian languages began to settle across this region. These communities were not part of a single unified state. They did not think of themselves as belonging to a country in the way we understand it today. Instead, their identities were shaped by tribes, by local traditions, and by shared ways of speaking and living. You walk through one of these early settlements. The structures are simple, built from earth and stone. Smoke rises gently from small fires. The sound of animals and quiet human activity fills the air. Life here is steady and repetitive, shaped by the rhythm of seasons. There is farming, herding, and the slow passing of knowledge from one generation to the next. What may seem like a quiet and ordinary life hides something important. These early communities are forming the foundations of a cultural identity that will last for thousands of years. The language they speak, the stories they tell, and the ways they organize their lives are beginning to connect them in ways they may not even fully realize. Some researchers suggest that the term Iran itself has roots in these early times, derived from a word meaning land of the Aryans, referring to these Indo-Iranian groups. But at this stage, that idea does not yet exist as a political identity. It is more like a distant echo, something that will only take shape much later. As you continue walking, you notice how the landscape influences everything. The mountains provide protection, but also isolation. The deserts create barriers that shape movement and trade. Water is precious, and where it flows, life gathers. Small communities develop along rivers and fertile valleys, each with its own customs and ways of thinking. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of early settlements in places like Susa, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world, showing that this region was already part of complex human networks thousands of years ago. These discoveries reveal organized societies with systems of trade, early forms of governance, and cultural expression. It is not a primitive world. It is developing one, quietly building layers of complexity. At the same time, there are details that feel surprising. Some ancient burial practices in the region suggest beliefs about the afterlife that are still not fully understood. Certain graves contain objects carefully arranged, as if meant to accompany the dead on a journey. Others are left more simply raising questions about social differences or changing traditions. Scholars remain divided about what these differences truly mean. Were they signs of class divisions already emerging, or do they reflect shifts in belief systems over time? The evidence is incomplete, and much of what we imagine is built from fragments. You begin to notice something else. There is no single moment where a place becomes a nation, no clear point where Persia suddenly appears or Iran suddenly exists. Instead, there is a long and gradual process. Cultures overlap, languages evolve, identities shift slowly often, without people realizing it as it happens. This is one of the most important ideas to hold on to as you move forward. The transformation from Persia to Iran is not a straight line. It is not a simple change that happens in a single event. It is a story that unfolds across thousands of years, shaped by countless decisions, encounters and adaptations. The wind moves softly across the open land. You can almost feel the weight of time here. Generations have lived and disappeared, leaving behind traces that are sometimes clear and sometimes almost invisible. Each layer adds something new, but never completely erases what came before. You pause for a moment and look around. There is no grand empire yet, no famous kings, no global influence, and yet everything that will come later is already beginning here, in the language spoken around small fires, in the traditions passed quietly between families, in the way people understand their place in the world. Some historians suggest that this early period is often overlooked because it lacks dramatic events or powerful figures, but without it, nothing else would make sense. It is the foundation upon which everything else is built. As the light begins to fade slightly, the landscape takes on a softer tone. The sounds grow quieter. The sense of movement slows. And you begin to understand that before Persia became a name known across continents, before Iran became a modern nation, there was simply this: a land, a people, and a story just beginning to take shape. The morning arrives quietly, almost unnoticed. You continue walking across the same wide landscape, but something feels slightly different now. Not in the land itself, but in the people who move across it. There is a growing sense of connection, something subtle but persistent, linking distant communities that may never meet yet share more than they realize. You begin to hear familiar sounds repeating in different places, words that echo across valleys, phrases that carry similar rhythms. At first it seems like coincidence, but as you listen more closely you start to notice patterns. These are not isolated groups anymore. They are part of something larger. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that during the 2nd millennium BC, E-groups, often referred to as Indo-Iranian peoples, spread across this region, bringing with them related languages and cultural traditions. These were not a single tribe or a unified nation. They were many groups moving, settling and adapting to different environments. Yet they shared linguistic roots that allowed them to understand each other, at least in part. You walk alongside one of these migrating groups. Their lives are not fixed. They move with their animals, following seasonal patterns, searching for water and fertile land. The pace is slow, deliberate. Children walk beside elders. Stories are told in the evenings, repeated often, shaping a shared memory that travels with them wherever they go. Language becomes something more than communication. It becomes a thread that connects identity. Even as groups separate and settle in different areas, their speech carries traces of a common origin. Over time, these languages begin to change. Dialects form, pronunciations shift. But the connection remains like distant relatives who still recognize one another. You begin to understand that identity here is not defined by borders or flags. It is shaped by language, by shared myths, by a sense of belonging that is carried in the mind rather than marked on a map. There are also early beliefs that begin to take form. You notice how people speak about the natural world with a sense of respect and meaning. Fire is not just warmth, it is something sacred. Water is not just survival, it is something to be protected. The sky, the earth, the changing seasons all seem to carry significance beyond the physical. Some researchers suggest that these early belief systems would later influence more structured religions, particularly those that emerged in the region centuries later. The reverence for elements like fire and truth appears again and again, hinting at a continuity that stretches across time. Yet not everything is clear. Archaeologists continue discussing whether these cultural similarities were the result of shared origins or long periods of interaction between different groups. Did these people begin as one and spread outward? Or did they become similar through constant contact and exchange? The evidence points in both directions, leaving the question open. As you move forward, you begin to see early signs of settlement becoming more permanent. Small communities grow larger. Structures become more organized. Trade begins to develop not just between nearby groups but across greater distances. You pass through a settlement where goods from far away have arrived. There are materials that do not belong to this land. Stones, metals, crafted objects that must have travelled across mountains and deserts to reach this place. It suggests something important. These people are not isolated. They're connected to a wider world. Daily life continues to feel grounded and steady. People wake with the sun, work through the day, and rest as darkness falls. Meals are simple. Tools are handmade. Knowledge is practical, passed directly from experience. But beneath this simplicity, something is building. You notice how certain leaders begin to emerge. Not kings in the later sense, but individuals who guide decisions, organize movement, or lead during times of conflict. Authority is still local, still flexible, but it is becoming more defined. There are also small but intriguing details that hint at a deeper complexity. Some communities appear to place greater importance on certain families or lineages. Objects of value are not distributed evenly. Certain individuals are buried with more care or with more possessions, suggesting early forms of social distinction. These differences raise quiet questions. Scholars remain divided about how structured these early societies truly were. Were they largely equal with only minor differences, or were hierarchies already forming in ways that would later become more rigid? The answers are not fully settled, and much depends on how the limited evidence is interpreted. As the day moves forward, you begin to feel that something important is taking shape. Not an empire, not a nation, but an identity. The word Iran still does not exist in the way it will later, but the idea behind it is slowly forming. A sense of belonging tied to language, to shared ancestry, to a common cultural memory that stretches across different groups and regions. You pause again and look across the land. It feels less empty now, not because there are more people, but because those people are connected in ways that are not immediately visible. This is how identity often begins, quietly, gradually, without a clear starting point. It is carried in words spoken around fires, in stories told to children, in the way people describe themselves and others. Over time, these small details accumulate, forming something larger than any individual group. You continue walking, aware that the changes you are witnessing are subtle but deeply important. The foundation is becoming stronger. The threads are weaving together, and somewhere in the distance, still far beyond the horizon, the idea of Persia is beginning to take shape. The air grows cooler as you move forward, and the land begins to feel more organized, more intentional. The scattered settlements you passed earlier now seem connected by something stronger. Paths are clearer. Movement is more directed. There is a quiet sense that power is beginning to gather. You find yourself approaching a place where decisions are no longer made only within small communities. There is a center now, a point toward which attention flows, and at the heart of it a figure begins to emerge from the background of history. His name is Cyrus the Great. You do not see him as a distant legend. You see him as a presence that shapes everything around you. The people speak of him with a mixture of respect and curiosity. Not fear in the way later rulers might inspire, but something steadier. A sense that under his leadership the world is changing in ways that feel both controlled and expansive. A widely recognized historical fact is that Cyrus founded what would become the Achaemenid Empire in the 6th century BCE, creating one of the largest empires the world had ever seen. But standing here, it does not feel like an empire yet. It feels like a shift in how power is understood. You walk through a growing administrative center. There are officials recording information, organizing resources, coordinating movement across distances that would have seemed impossible before. Messages travel along routes that are becoming more reliable. Authority is no longer scattered. It is being gathered and directed. What makes this moment feel different is not just expansion, it is how that expansion is handled. You hear the conversations about lands that have been brought under Cyrus's control. Regions with different languages, different customs, different beliefs. And yet instead of forcing them into a single mold, there is a surprising level of tolerance. One detail often noted by historians is that Cyrus allowed many conquered peoples to continue practicing their own religions and traditions. In Babylon, for example, he is said to have permitted displaced communities to return to their homelands and rebuild their temples. This approach stands in contrast to the harsher methods used by many other rulers of the time. You begin to sense why this matters. Control through force can be immediate but fragile. Control through acceptance creates something more stable, something that can last. As you move deeper into the Chaos world, you notice how systems are being built to support this growing structure. Roads are improved. Communication networks expand. There is a sense of coordination that allows distant regions to remain connected to a central authority without losing their local identity. You pass by a group of travelers who have come from far away. Their clothing is different. Their language sounds unfamiliar. And yet they are part of this same system. They move through the empire with a level of security that suggests a shared understanding of rules and protection. At the same time, and there are details that feel more complex, even uncertain. Some researchers question whether Cyrus's reputation for tolerance has been idolized over time. Certain sources present him as a uniquely benevolent ruler, while others suggest that his policies were also practical strategies designed to maintain control over a vast and diverse population. The line between generosity and political calculation is not always clear. You pause to consider this. It does not diminish what he achieved, but it adds depth. Leaders are rarely simple. Their actions can serve multiple purposes at once. As the day unfolds, you begin to see how identity is changing again. Earlier it was shaped by language and shared cultural roots. Now it is also being shaped by the political structure. People who were once only loosely connected are now part of a larger system, a single empire that stretches across immense distances. And yet something remains consistent. The sense of being part of a broader Iranian identity does not disappear. It evolves. It expands to include new influences, new interactions, new ways of understanding the world. You notice small but telling details. Administrative records written in multiple languages. Officials who act as intermediaries between cultures. Symbols that begin to represent authority across different regions. These are signs of a system that is not just conquering but integrating. There is also an atmosphere of movement. Messengers riding across long distances, caravans carrying goods from one end of the empire to the other. Information flowing in ways that were not possible before. The world feels larger but also more connected. As evening approaches, the light softens again. The structures around you cast long shadows. The noise of activity quiets, but the sense of presence remains. You begin to understand that this moment is not just about the rise of a powerful ruler. It is about a new way of organizing the world. A way that allows diversity to exist within unity. A system that can hold together different peoples without completely erasing their differences. Some scholars continue to debate whether this model was truly as stable as it appears, or whether underlying tensions were always present waiting to surface. Managing such a vast empire required constant balance, and not all regions experienced this system in the same way. You stand still for a moment taking it in. Earlier you walked through scattered communities loosely connected by language and tradition. Now you stand within something far larger. A structure that reaches across continents. A vision of power that extends beyond simple domination. And at the center of it, a figure whose decisions will echo for centuries. Cyrus does not just build an empire. He reshapes the idea of what an empire can be. And as you continue forward, you begin to feel that this is only the beginning of something even greater. The world around you feels wider now. What began as scattered lands and emerging leadership has unfolded into something vast, almost difficult to hold in your mind all at once. You move along a long, carefully maintained road, and it stretches farther than you can see, connecting distant regions into a single flowing system. It is no longer just a collection of lands under one ruler. It is a structure that breathes, moves, and holds together an extraordinary range of people. You are now fully inside the Achaemenid Empire. A widely recognized historical fact is that at its height, this empire extended from parts of South Asia to Egypt and even into southeastern Europe. It is often described as one of the largest empires of the ancient world. But standing here, it does not feel like a map. It feels like motion. Caravans pass by carrying goods across regions that once had little contact with each other. Traders speak different languages, yet they understand the system that allows them to travel safely. You hear accents shift from one group to another. Clothing styles change. Food smells different depending on where you are. And yet there is a shared sense of order. You pass a group of royal messengers riding with urgency. They move quickly, stopping only briefly at stations along the road. These routes are part of an organized network that allows communication across the empire in a way that would have seemed impossible before. Messages that once took months can now travel in weeks or even days. This system of roads and communication is not just practical, it is essential. Without it, the empire would fragment. With it, distant regions remain connected to a central authority. You begin to notice how governance works across such a vast space. Local regions are not ruled directly in every detail. Instead, they are organized into provinces, each overseen by a governor. These governors manage local affairs while remaining accountable to the central power. It's a system that balances control with flexibility. You enter one of these administrative entes. Officials record taxes, organize labor, and maintain order. There is a rhythm to it, almost quiet and methodical. Governance here is not always dramatic. Much of it happens through routine, through systems that operate day after day without interruption. One lesser-known detail emerges as you observe more closely. Standardized weights and measures begin to appear across different regions, allowing trade to function more smoothly. Coins are introduced in some areas, creating a shared economic language that connects distant markets. These small changes quietly transform how people interact with one another. And yet not everything is as stable as it appears. Historians still debate whether such a vast empire could truly maintain cohesion without constant tension beneath the surface. While the system of provinces and governors allowed for flexibility, it also created opportunities for corruption, rebellion, or local resistance. Some regions likely experienced this structure very differently from others. You pause to consider this as you watch a group of officials discussing matters in low voices. The empire feels strong but also delicate in ways that are not immediately visible. As you continue walking, you begin to see how identity is becoming more layered. People still belong to their local communities. They still speak their own languages and follow their own traditions, but they are also part of something larger now. They exist within an imperial system that shapes their daily lives in subtle ways. You notice inscriptions carved into stone written in multiple scripts. These are official messages meant to be understood across different regions. The empire communicates with its people not through a single voice, but through many adapted to different audiences. This is one of the defining features of what you're witnessing. It is not uniformity, it is coordination. The sun begins to lower, casting a golden light across the land. You find yourself near a gathering of people from different parts of the empire. Their conversations blend together, creating a soft, layered sound. It is not chaotic, it is complex. Some scholars remain divided about whether this level of diversity strengthened the empire or made it more vulnerable over time. A system that allows many cultures to coexist can be resilient, but it can also struggle when those cultures pull in different directions. You begin to feel that both may be true. As you stand there, you think back to earlier moments when identity was shaped by language and shared ancestry. That foundation is still present, but now it is intertwined with something else. A political structure that stretches across continents, bringing together people who might otherwise have remained separate. The idea of Persia is no longer just cultural, it is imperial. And yet even within this vast system, the deeper roots of identity continue to grow quietly. The languages, the traditions, the beliefs that began long before this empire still live within it, shaping how people understand themselves. The wind moves gently again, carrying with it the distant sounds of movement and conversation. The empire feels alive, not just in its scale, but in its constant motion. You take one last look across the road stretching into the distance. It connects everything, and for now it holds. The road beneath your feet begins to soften into dust as you move away from the main routes of travel. The vast structure of the empire still surrounds you, but now you step into something quieter, closer to the ground. The rhythm of daily life becomes clearer here, away from officials and long-distance messengers. You enter a village just as the morning light begins to spread across the land. The air carries the smell of baked grain and wood smoke. People are already awake, moving through familiar routines that repeat day after day. There is no sense of urgency here, only a steady pace shaped by necessity. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that most people within the Achaemenid Empire lived simple agricultural lives. While kings and administrators managed vast territories, the majority of the population worked the land-tended animals and produced the goods that sustained the empire. You watch as farmers move into the fields. Their tools are basic but effective. Irrigation channels guide water carefully across the soil, ensuring crops can grow even in dry conditions. This system of managing water is not accidental. It is the result of knowledge passed down over generations, refined through experience. Children help where they can, learning by watching and doing. There are no formal lessons, but knowledge flows naturally within the community. You notice how skills are shared, how each person understands their role, and how the work of many individuals supports the whole. As the day continues, you move through different parts of the village. There are artisans shaping pottery, weaving textiles, crafting tools. Each object is made with care, not just for use, but often with patterns and designs that reflect cultural identity. These details may seem small, but they carry meaning. Trade reaches even into places like this. You see goods that do not originate here. A piece of cloth dyed with materials from another region. A tool made from metal sourced far away. These items arrive through networks that connect even the most remote communities to the wider world. One lesser-known detail begins to stand out. In some parts of the empire, workers involved in large construction projects were not always enslaved, as is often assumed for ancient societies. Records suggest that many labourers received rations, payments, or compensation for their work. This challenges common ideas about how such large structures were built. Yet not everything is fully understood. Archaeologists continue discussing whether these systems of labour were consistent across the empire or varied significantly depending on region and circumstance. Some areas may have relied more heavily on forced labour, while others operated through organised and compensated workforces. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. You sit for a moment in the shade of a simple structure and listen to the sounds around you. Conversations are soft, familiar. Laughter appears in brief moments, then fades back into the steady rhythm of work. Life here is not easy, but it is structured in a way that feels stable. Food is prepared in simple ways. Grains, vegetables, and occasionally meat form the basis of daily meals. Water is carefully managed. Nothing is wasted. The environment shapes everything, reminding people constantly of its limits. You begin to notice how the empire exists here, even if it feels distant. Taxes are collected. Certain goods are set aside. Officials may visit occasionally. The larger system depends on places like this, even if the people here rarely see the full scale of what they are part of. There is also a sense of cultural continuity. The language spoken here carries echoes of earlier times. Stories are told in the evenings, preserving memory and identity. These are not written records, but they are powerful in their own way. Some scholars remain divided about how much influence the central authority truly had on everyday life in villages like this. While administrative systems were clearly in place, the day-to-day experiences of ordinary people may have remained largely local, shaped more by tradition than by distant rulers. You begin to understand that both perspectives can exist at the same time. The empire provides structure and connection, but life is lived at a much smaller scale. As the sun begins to lower again, the pace of activity slows. People return from the fields, fires are lit. The village gathers in quiet ways, sharing food and conversation. The atmosphere becomes softer, more reflective. You think back to the grand scale of the empire, the roads, the governance, the movement of goods and messages. And now here you see the foundation of it all. Without these daily routines, without the steady work of ordinary people, none of the larger structures could exist. This is where history often becomes quiet. There are no great battles here, no famous speeches, no dramatic turning points, and yet this is where the empire lives and breathes, in the hands of farmers, in the work of artisans, in the stories told at the end of the day. You look around once more as the light fades into evening. The village settles into rest, preparing to begin again the next day. And you begin to sense that to understand Persia, you must not only look at its rulers and its power, but also at the countless lives that sustained it quietly every single day. The night settles gently across the land, and with it a different kind of awareness begins to emerge. You move away from the quiet homes and fields, following a faint glow in the distance. It flickers softly, steady but alive, drawing people toward it with quiet intention. As you approach, you realize this is not just a fire for warmth or cooking. It is something more. You step into a space that feels both open and sound. The air is still almost reverent. At the center, a flame burns with careful attention, protected, maintained, never allowed to fade. The people gathered here do not speak loudly. Their movements are deliberate, respectful. You have entered the spiritual world of Zoroastrianism. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that this belief system often associates with the teachings of a figure known as Zoroaster, became one of the earliest organized religions in this region. It centers on the idea of a cosmic struggle between truth and falsehood, light and darkness, good and evil. You sit quietly near the edge of the gathering and listen. The flame is not worshipped as an object, but respected as a symbol. It represents purity, truth, and the presence of something greater than the physical world. The people here speak of maintaining balance, of choosing actions that align with what is right, not just in behavior, but in thought and intention. This idea feels simple yet deeply structured. Every action carries meaning, every decision becomes part of a larger moral pattern. You begin to notice how this belief system connects with earlier traditions you observed. The reverence for fire, the respect for natural elements, the sense that the world is filled with significance. These ideas are now being shaped into something more defined, more organized. Priests move carefully around the flame, tending to it with practice movements. There are rituals, but they are not overwhelming. They feel steady, almost calming, reinforcing a sense of order in a world that can often feel uncertain. One lesser-known detail begins to surface as you listen more closely. Zoroastrian practices placed a strong emphasis on cleanliness and the avoidance of pollution, especially in relation to natural elements like earth, water, and fire. Even the handling of the dead was approached carefully with specific methods designed to prevent contamination of these elements. This attention to purity reflects a worldview where physical and spiritual cleanliness are closely connected, yet not everything about this belief system fully understood. Scholars remain divided about the exact timeline of Zoroaster's life and teachings. Some suggest he lived many centuries earlier than traditionally thought, while others place him closer to the period when these ideas became more widely established. The lack of definitive historical records leaves room for interpretation. You consider this as you watch the flame continue to burn steadily. It feels timeless, as though it has always been here and will continue long after this moment. As the night deepens, the gathering becomes quieter. People sit in stillness, reflecting, perhaps considering their own actions and choices. There is a sense of introspection that feels personal yet shared. You begin to understand how this belief system shapes identity in a new way. Earlier identity was rooted in language and shared ancestry and cultural memory. Now it is also shaped by a moral framework and a way of understanding right and wrong, truth and deception. This adds another layer to what it means to belong. You notice how these ideas extend beyond the gathering itself. They influence daily life decisions, relationships. The concept of living truthfully is not confined to ritual, it's meant to guide every aspect of existence. Some researchers question how uniformly these beliefs were practiced across the empire. While Zoroastrianism held a central place, especially among the ruling class's local traditions, and other belief systems continued to exist alongside it. The spiritual landscape was likely more diverse than it may appear at first. You begin to sense that this diversity does not necessarily weaken the system. Instead, it reflects the same pattern you have seen before. A structure that allows different elements to exist together, creating something more complex than a single unified belief. The flame continues to burn unwavering. You feel its warmth gentle but constant. It does not demand attention, yet it holds it effortlessly. It becomes a quiet anchor in the darkness, a symbol of continuity in its world that is constantly changing. As you slowly step back from the gathering, the light fades behind you, but its presence lingers. The ideas you encountered do not remain in that single place. They travel with the people, shaping their thoughts, their actions, their sense of purpose. You walk into the night aware that something has shifted again. The story of this land is no longer only about power or expansion. It is also about meaning, about how people understand their place in the world and how they choose to live within it. And as you continue forward, you begin to feel that this spiritual foundation will remain even as everything else begins to change once more. The night does not last forever. A pale light begins to rise along the horizon, and with it comes a subtle feeling of change. You've grown familiar with the rhythms of this world. The balance between power and belief, between daily life and vast imperial structure, has settled into something that feels almost stable. But as the light spreads, you begin to sense that this stability is fragile. You move toward a larger city now, one that carries the weight of imperial presence more visibly than the villages behind you. Its walls are strong, its gates are guarded. Inside there is movement, purpose, and a quiet confidence that has been built over generations. And yet beneath that confidence something else is stirring. A widely accepted historical fact tells us that in the 4th century BCE, a young Macedonian king named Alexander the Great launched a campaign that would ultimately bring an end to the Achaemenid Empire. His army moved rapidly, defeating Persian forces in a series of decisive battles. But standing here, you do not see battles yet. You see anticipation. Whispers move through the streets, messengers arrive more frequently, conversations are quieter, more focused. The idea of an approaching force, distant but real, begins to take shape in people's minds. You walk through a marketplace that still operates but with a different energy. Traders speak in lower tones. Supplies are being gathered more carefully. There is no panic, but there is awareness. You begin to hear his name, Alexander. At first it feels like a rumour, a distant figure moving across lands far away, but with each passing moment the distance seems to shrink. Reports of victories reach the city, accounts of cities falling, of armies retreating, of a force that moves with speed and precision. One lesser-known detail begins to emerge as you listen. Alexander's campaign was not only about conquest. In many places he adopted aspects of the cultures he encountered, including Persian customs and administrative practices. This blending of cultures would later influence the regions he controlled, creating a complex legacy rather than a simple replacement of one system with another. Yet the immediate reality feels more uncertain. Some historians continue to debate whether the fall of the Persian Empire was inevitable due to internal weaknesses, or whether Alexander's leadership and strategy were the decisive factors. The truth may lie somewhere between these views, shaped by both internal challenges and external pressure. You move toward the city gates as the day grows brighter. There is movement now more visible than before. Soldiers gather, orders are given. The structure of the empire, which once felt steady and expansive, now begins to tighten, focusing inward. You can feel the tension in the air. It is not loud, it is not chaotic, it is controlled but strained. You think back to earlier moments when the empire felt unbreakable. Its roads connected distant lands. Its systems held together diverse peoples. Its beliefs provided meaning and continuity. And yet even the most carefully built structures can shift. As you stand near the walls, you imagine what it must feel like for those who live here. This is not just a political event. It is a disruption of everything familiar. The systems they rely on, the authority they recognize, the stability they have known, all begin to feel uncertain. The sun climbs higher, casting sharper light across the city. Shadows shorten, details become clearer. You notice how quickly change can move. What once felt distant now feels immediate. What once seemed stable now feels vulnerable. And yet there is something else beneath this moment. A sense that even if the empire falls, something deeper will remain. Language does not disappear overnight. Culture does not vanish in a single event. Beliefs do not simply fade. They adapt. They reshape themselves. They continue even when the structures that once supported them collapse. This is what you begin to understand as you watch the city prepare. The fall of an empire is not the end of a people. It is a transformation. You take a final look at the walls, at the people moving with quiet urgency, at the systems that have held this world together for generations. And then, as the sound of distant movement begins to reach you, faint but unmistakable, you realize that you are standing at the edge of a turning point. The world you have come to know is about to change, and nothing will remain exactly the same. The sound you heard before never fully arrives as a single moment. There is no instant where everything changes at once. Instead, the shift spreads slowly like a ripple moving across still water. You continue walking and the world feels altered but not entirely unfamiliar. The empire you knew has not vanished completely. It has been broken, reshaped and absorbed into something new. You move through a landscape that still carries the structures of the past. Roads remain, cities still stand, administrative systems continue to function in altered form, but the authority behind them has changed. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that after the conquests of Alexander the Great, his empire did not remain unified for long. Following his death, it fragmented into several successor states. In this region, much of the former Persian territory came under the control of the Seleucid Empire. You walk through a city that now reflects this transition. At first glance, much appears the same. Markets still operate, people still move through their routines, but as you look more closely, subtle differences begin to appear. New styles of architecture emerge alongside older Persian designs. Greek language can be heard in certain administrative and cultural spaces. Artistic styles begin to shift, blending local traditions with influences from far to the west, and this is not a simple replacement of one culture with another. It is a layering. You pass a building where inscriptions appear in multiple languages, Greek alongside local scripts. It suggests not dominance alone, but adaptation. The new rulers are not erasing everything that came before. They are working within it, reshaping it to fit their own systems. One lesser-known detail becomes visible in these spaces. In some cities, Greek settlers lived alongside local populations, creating communities where ideas, customs, and daily practices blended in unexpected ways. Food, clothing, and even religious practices began to reflect this interaction, forming something neither entirely Persian nor entirely Greek. Yet the experience is not uniform. Some researchers question how deeply these cultural exchanges affected the broader population. While urban centres show clear signs of blending rural areas, may have remained more rooted in older traditions, less influenced by the changes happening in political and administrative centres. You begin to feel this contrast as you move away from the city. In smaller communities, the rhythms of life remain familiar. The language spoken carries the same tones you heard earlier. Traditions continue passed down without interruption. The larger political shifts feel distant here, even if they shape the conditions of life in indirect ways. This creates a kind of dual reality. In one, space change is visible, active, shaping identity in new directions. In another, continuity holds steady, preserving what has always been. Scholars remain divided about how this period should be understood. Was it a time of cultural loss where Persian identity was overshadowed by foreign influence, or was it a period of transformation that allowed new forms of identity to emerge? The answer depends on where you stand and what you choose to focus on. You pause at the edge of a road that once connected the vast Persian Empire. It is still used, still maintained in parts, but its purpose has shifted. It no longer serves a single unified authority. Instead, it connects regions that are now part of a more fragmented political landscape. And yet the deeper connections remain. Language continues to evolve, but it does not disappear. Cultural memory persists even when it is not always visible. People still understand themselves in ways that trace back to earlier times, even if they now live under different rulers. You begin to sense something important. Identity is not easily replaced. It adapts, absorbs, reshapes itself, but it rarely vanishes completely. As the day moves forward, you notice how people navigate this changing world. Some embrace new influences, adopting elements of Greek culture that offer advantages in trade or status. Others hold more firmly to older traditions, maintaining continuity in the face of uncertainty. Both approaches exist side by side, creating a complex and layered society. You hear conversations that reflect this tension. Some speak of opportunity, of new ideas and connections. Others speak more quietly of loss of changes that feel imposed rather than chosen. Neither perspective is entirely right or wrong. They are responses to the same moment experienced differently. As the light begins to soften again, you take one last look at the world around you. It is no longer the empire you once walked through, but it is not entirely new either. It is something in between, a bridge between what was and what will come next. And as you continue forward, you begin to feel that this period of transition, uncertain and complex, is quietly preparing the ground for something that will rise again, shaped by both memory and change. The land feels quieter again, but not empty. You move across open plains where the horizon stretches wide and uninterrupted. The traces of earlier empires still linger in roads, in cities, and the habits of people who continue their lives within structures that have changed many times. Yet now, something new begins to rise from within this landscape, not imposed from afar, but growing from the region itself. There is a sense of return, not a return to the past exactly, but to something familiar, something rooted more deeply in this land. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that around the 3rd century BCE, a new power began to emerge known as the Persian Empire. Unlike the earlier rulers who came from outside this empire, were shaped by people who were themselves part of the Iranian world, drawing on older traditions while adapting to new realities. You walk alongside a group of riders moving across the plains. Their movements are fluid, almost effortless. Horses are central here, not just for travel, but for identity. These are not the tightly structured armies you might have imagined from earlier imperial centres. They are mobile, adaptable, able to move quickly across vast distances. This style of movement becomes a defining feature. The Parthians are known for their cavalry, especially their ability to fight while retreating, a tactic that would later be remembered with a sense of both admiration and frustration by their enemies. It reflects a different approach to power, one that relies on flexibility rather than rigid control. You begin to notice how governance works in this world. It feels less centralized than before. Power is shared among local leaders, noble families who maintain influence over their regions while acknowledging a broader authority. It is a looser structure, not as tightly controlled as the empire you saw earlier, but perhaps more adaptable to the varied landscape and cultures of the region. One lesser known tale begins to surface as you listen to conversations among travelers. The Parthian system often allowed significant autonomy to local rulers, meaning that different regions could operate in ways that suited their own traditions and needs. This created a patchwork of governance unified in name but diverse in practice. Yet this flexibility also raises question. Some researchers question whether this decentralized structure made the empire more resilient or more vulnerable. While it allowed for local adaptation, it could also lead to internal divisions, especially when central authority was weak or contested. You pause to consider this as you watch a group of riders disappear into the distance. The empire feels less visible here, less defined by grand structures or centralized administration. It is present, but in a quieter way, carried through networks of loyalty, tradition, and shared interest. As you continue walking, you begin to sense another presence shaping this world. To the west, beyond the horizon, another great power exists. Rome. You do not see it directly, but you feel its influence in the conversations around you. Traders speak of distant markets. Soldiers speak of conflicts along faraway borders. The relationship between these two powers is not simple. It is a long and complex rivalry. A widely known historical fact is that the Parthian Empire and the Roman Empire engaged in repeated conflicts, each seeking influence over key regions, especially in areas like Mesopotamia. These encounters were not always decisive, but they shaped the balance of power across a large part of the known world. You imagine these distant confrontations, armies meeting across unfamiliar terrain, strategies adapting to different styles of warfare, each side learning from the other even as they compete. And yet here in the quiet of the plains, life continues. You pass through a settlement where daily routines unfold much as they did before. Farming, trade, family life. The presence of empire is felt, but it does not dominate every moment. This continuity begins to feel significant. Despite the rise and fall of different powers, despite the shifts in control and influence, the deeper patterns of life remain. Language continues to evolve, but its roots are still present. Cultural traditions persist, carried forward through generations. Identity adapts, but it does not disappear. Scholars remain divided about how strongly Parthian rule reinforced a unified Iranian identity. Some suggest it played a key role in preserving and strengthening cultural continuity after the disruptions of earlier conquests. Others argue that its decentralized nature limited its ability to create a strong, cohesive identity across all regions. You begin to feel that both perspectives hold truth. Unity and diversity exist together, shaping the character of this period. As the light begins to fade once more, you take a moment to look across the open land. It feels expansive, but also grounded, rooted in a way that earlier moments did not always feel. This is not an empire that imposes itself loudly. It is one that moves with the land, adapts to it, grows within it. And as you continue forward, you begin to sense that this balance between flexibility and continuity, between local identity and broader connection, is quietly preparing the way for another transformation still to come. The horizon shifts again. You walk along a ridge where the land stretches in two directions, and for the first time the sense of distance feels charged with something more than space. There is another presence out there, not just a distant culture, but a force that presses back, shaping this world through constant interaction. You do not need to see it directly to feel it. Rome. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that for centuries the Parthian Empire and the Roman Empire existed as rival powers, each influencing vast regions and competing for control over key territories. They would say their interactions were not defined by a single war, but by a long sequence of encounters, negotiations, and shifting boundaries. You begin to sense this rivalry not as a constant battle, but as a pressure that moves through everything. You pass through a town where soldiers gather quietly. Their armor reflects light in a muted way. They are not preparing for immediate conflict, but they're ready. Conversations between them are focused, practical. They speak of movement, of positioning of borders that are never entirely fixed. The land between these two empires is not stable. It shifts sometimes slowly, sometimes suddenly. Regions like Mesopotamia become spaces of repeated contest, changing hands over the time. Cities are influenced by both worlds, absorbing elements from each, never belonging entirely to one or the other. You walk through one such place. The architecture feels layered. Some buildings carry designs that echo earlier Persian forms. Others reflect influences that have travelled from the West. Languages mix in the air. Trade goods from distant lands are exchanged in markets that feel both familiar and foreign at the same time. This is not just a frontier, it is a meeting point. One lesser-known detail emerges as you observe more closely. Diplomatic exchanges between these empires were often as important as military encounters. Envoys travelled long distances, negotiating alliances, trade agreements, and temporary peace. These moments of communication shape the relationship as much as conflict did. Yet the tension never fully disappears. Some researchers question whether this long rivalry strengthened both empires by forcing them to adapt and improve, or whether it drained resources and contributed to their eventual decline. The evidence suggests a complex balance where competition drives innovation, but also creates constant strain. You move along a road that carries signs of military use. Tracks are deeper. Movement here has been heavier, more frequent. You imagine armies passing through, not always in battle, but always prepared for it. The idea of borders begins to feel different. They are not fixed lines drawn on a map, they are zones, areas where influence overlaps, where control is negotiated rather than absolute. You pause and look out across the land. It feels like a quiet tension held in place, never fully resolved, and yet life continues within it. Farmers still work their fields, traders still move goods, families still gather in the evenings. The presence of rivalry shapes the conditions of life, but it does not stop it. You begin to understand that this constant interaction does something important. It forces adaptation. Military strategies evolve. Political systems adjust. Cultural exchanges occur even between rivals. Ideas move across borders, carried by traders, travelers, and even soldiers. You notice small details that reflect this exchange. Clothing styles that blend elements from both worlds. Words borrowed from one language into another. Techniques of construction or organization that appear in new forms. These are quiet signs of connection within conflict. Scholars remain divided about how much these interactions influence the deeper identity of the region. Some argue that the rivalry reinforced a distinct Iranian identity in contrast to Rome. Others suggest that the exchange of ideas blurred boundaries, creating a more interconnected cultural landscape. You begin to feel that identity is not shaped by isolation alone, but also by interaction. Even opposition can define who you are. As the light begins to soften once more, the sense of tension does not disappear. It remains part of the background of this world. You think back to earlier moments when the land felt more unified, more centered around a single authority. Now it feels balanced between forces shaped by a relationship that is both competitive and connected. You take one last look across the ridge. Two worlds facing each other, shaping each other, and in between them, a land that continues to endure, adapting quietly, preparing for what comes next. The tension you have been feeling does not remain constant. Over time, it begins to shift to gather into something more focused, more deliberate. The land you walk through now feels different again. Not fragmented, not loosely connected, but moving towards a renewed sense of unity. You begin to notice stronger centers of power emerging. Cities that feel more organized, more intentional in their design and purpose. There is a sense that something is being rebuilt, not from nothing, but from memory. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that in the 3rd century CE, a new empire rose from within this region known as the Sasanian Empire. It followed the Parthian period and brought a more centralized form of rule, reshaping the political and cultural landscape once again. You walk toward one of its major cities. The difference is immediate. The architecture feels more deliberate, more monumental. Structures rise with a sense of permanence. There is a clear effort to project strength, stability, and continuity with earlier Persian traditions. This is not just a new empire, it is a revival. You begin to hear references to ancient kings, to earlier forms of authority that are being consciously remembered and restored. The Sasanians do not present themselves as something entirely new. They position themselves as heirs to a deeper past, reconnecting with the legacy of earlier Persian greatness. One of the most visible changes appears in governance. Power is more centralized again. Authority flows more directly from the top, reaching down through structured systems that aim to maintain control across the empire. This creates a stronger sense of unity, but also requires careful management. You pass through an administrative center where officials work with precision. Records are kept, decisions are organized, and communication moves in a controlled and deliberate way. The looseness of the previous era has been replaced by a clearer hierarchy. At the same time, you begin to notice how belief and power become more closely linked. Zoroastrianism, which you encountered earlier, now holds a more formal and influential role within the empire. It is not only a spiritual system, but also part of the structure of authority. Religious leaders and political leaders are connected, reinforcing each other. One lesser-known detail becomes visible in this arrangement. The Sasanians developed a more defined class structure, with distinct social groups that included priests, warriors, scribes, and common people. This organization shaped how individuals lived and interacted, creating a more structured society than before. Yet this structure also raises question. Some researchers question how rigid this system truly was in everyday life. While official classifications existed, that the extent to which people could move between these roles or challenge them is not entirely clear. The reality may have varied depending on region and circumstance. You move through a gathering where religious rituals are performed with greater formality than before. The flame you once saw in quiet settings is now part of a larger, more organized practice. Temples are maintained with care. Rituals follow established patterns. There is a sense of order, but also of expectation. Belief is no longer only personal or communal. It is also institutional. You begin to feel how this shapes identity in a new way. Being part of this world now involves not only language and culture, but also a more defined relationship with both political and religious structures. You notice how this clarity brings strength. The empire feels more unified, more stable in its identity. It presents itself with confidence grounded in both tradition and organization. But you also sense something beneath the surface. A structure that is strong can also become rigid. Some scholars remain divided about whether the Sasanian emphasis on centralized authority and religious unity strengthened the empire in the long term or made it less adaptable to change. Systems that are tightly organized can be powerful. They can also struggle when faced with unexpected challenges. You pause and look around. The world here feels solid, rooted, connected to a past that is being actively remembered and preserved. And yet you know from the rhythm of history that no structure remains unchanged forever. As the light begins to soften once more, you take in the balance of this moment. A renewed empire, a revived identity, a system that brings together power and belief in a way that feels complete. And as you continue forward, you begin to sense that this very completeness, this sense of order and unity will soon be tested by forces that approach from beyond the horizon. The structure around you feels firm, almost unshakable. You walk through a city shaped by order, where everything seems to follow a clear pattern. Authority flows from the top. Belief reinforces power. Society is arranged in ways that feel stable, defined, and enduring. It gives the impression that this system could continue without interruption. But as you move more slowly through its streets, you begin to notice the details beneath the surface. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that in the Sasanian Empire, kingship was not just political, it was sacred. The ruler was seen as chosen, supported by divine favor, responsible not only for governance, but for maintaining cosmic order itself. You pass by a ceremonial space where this idea is made visible. There are symbols carved into stone, figures standing with deliberate posture. The king is represented not simply as a leader, but as a central force holding the world in balance. This is not just authority, it is responsibility on a scale that feels almost overwhelming. You begin to understand that power here is deeply tied to belief. Zoroastrianism, which once felt like a guiding philosophy for individuals, now operates within the structure of the state. Priests play an important role maintaining rituals, interpreting teachings, and reinforcing the connection between divine order and earthly rule. The flame which you once saw burning quietly in the night now exists within temples that are carefully maintained. It still represents truth and purity, but it is now part of a larger system, one that supports and reflects the authority of the empire. One lesser-known detail emerges as you observe more closely. In some regions, religious and legal systems became closely intertwined with priests, influencing not only spiritual matters, but also aspects of law and governance. This created a society where belief shaped not just personal behavior, but public order. And yet this connection between power and faith is not entirely without tension. Some researchers question how widely accepted this structure was among all populations within the empire. While it may have been strong at the center, distant regions with different traditions and beliefs may not have fully embraced the same level of integration between religion and authority. You walk through a quieter part of the city where daily life unfolds beyond the formal structures of power. Here people move through familiar routines. Families gather, work continues, conversations happen in low voices. The presence of the state is felt, but not always directly. You begin to notice how individuals navigate this world. Some align closely with the expectations of the system, participating in rituals, following established roles, supporting the structures that define society. Others seem more distant, maintaining older traditions, or adapting quietly in ways that do not always draw attention. This creates a subtle balance. The system appears unified, but within it there are layers of variation. Scholars remain divided about how rigid this society truly was in practice. Official structures suggest clear divisions and expectations, but the lived experiences of individuals may have been more flexible, shaped by local conditions and personal circumstances. You pause near a gathering where a ritual is taking place. The movements are precise, the words spoken are measured. There is a sense of continuity of connection to something that extends far beyond this moment. And yet as you watch, you begin to sense something else, a quiet pressure, not visible in the ritual itself, but present in the idea that such a structured system must constantly maintain itself. It requires participation, it requires belief, it requires alignment, and any system that depends on these things must also respond when they begin to shift. You think back to earlier moments when identity felt more fluid, shaped by language and shared culture without strong central control. Now identity is more defined, more guided, more connected to formal structures. This brings clarity, but it may also limit flexibility. As the light begins to fade once more, the city takes on a softer tone. The structured world you've been observing feels quieter now, less rigid in appearance, though still deeply organized beneath the surface. You begin to understand that strength and vulnerability often exist together. A system that appears stable may carry within it the seeds of change, not because it is weak, but because it is complex. You take a final look at the temple, at the flame that continues to burn steadily, at the people who move through their roles with practiced certainty. And as you turn to continue your journey, you begin to feel that this carefully balanced world is approaching a moment where everything will be tested in ways no one here can fully anticipate. The stillness does not last. You walk beyond the edges of the city where the structured world of temples and authority begins to fade into open land again. The air feels different here, carrying with it a sense of movement that is not yet fully visible but impossible to ignore. It does not arrive all at once. It begins as stories. Travellers speak of changes far to the south and west, of a new force rising in the Arabian Peninsula, of communities uniting under a single belief, moving with a purpose that feels both spiritual and political at the same time. At first it feels distant, but as you continue walking, the distance begins to shrink. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that in the 7th century CE, the rise of Islam transformed the region in ways that would reshape its future entirely. Following the death of Muhammad, Arab forces expanded rapidly, bringing new territories under their control, including the lands of the Persian Empire. You begin to feel this transformation not as a single moment of collapse, but as a process. You pass through a settlement where the atmosphere has changed. Conversations are quieter, more uncertain. News travels quickly, but not always clearly. There are accounts of battles, of shifting control of regions falling under new authority, and yet life continues even as everything shifts. You notice how people respond in different ways. Some speak with concern, uncertain of what this new force will bring. Others speak with curiosity, drawn to the ideas and beliefs that accompany it. There is no single reaction. The change touches each person differently. One lesser known detail begins to surface as you listen more closely. In many areas, the transition to Islamic rule did not happen instantly or uniformly. Existing administrative systems were often preserved and adapted rather than completely replaced. Local officials continued to operate, sometimes under new authority, creating a sense of continuity within change. This creates a transition that is both disruptive and gradual, yet the scale of transformation remains profound. Some researchers question how quickly the population itself adopted Islam. While political control shifted relatively rapidly, cultural and religious change appears to have unfolded over generations, not overnight. Many communities continued to practice earlier traditions even as new structures took hold. You move through a space where two worlds seem to overlap. A building that once served a different purpose now carries new meaning. Words spoken in prayer sound unfamiliar at first, yet they begin to settle into a rhythm that feels steady and intentional. The language is different, but the sense of devotion is not entirely foreign. You begin to understand that belief systems do not simply replace one another. They interact, they influence, they reshape each other over time. As you walk, you think back to the structured world of the Persian Empire where power and faith were closely linked. That system felt complete, almost unchangeable. And yet here you are watching it shift. The authority that once seemed fixed is dissolving, not entirely disappearing, but losing its central place. You begin to sense something deeper beneath this moment. The identity of this land is being challenged but not erased. Language continues. Cultural memory persists. Ways of thinking adapt, absorbing new influences while retaining older ones beneath the surface. Scholars remain divided about how this transformation should be understood. Some view it as a sharp break, a moment where one world ended and another began. Others see it as a more gradual process where continuity and change exist together, shaping a new identity over time. You feel both perspectives as you walk. There is loss, there is change, but there is also adaptation. As the day begins to fade, you find yourself standing at the edge of a landscape that feels both familiar and unfamiliar at once. The structures of the past are still visible, but their meaning is shifting. The future is beginning to take shape, but it is not yet fully clear. You listen to the quiet sounds around you, a new language spoken in the distance, a familiar one closer by. The blending of voices creates something that feels uncertain but also alive. You take a slow breath and continue forward. The world you have known has changed, and yet the story is not ending. It is becoming something new. The change does not settle into silence. Instead, it begins to take on a new rhythm, one that feels both unfamiliar and strangely continuous. You walk through a city where voices carry in a different language, yet the patterns of life remain recognizable. Markets still open at dawn. Water is still drawn carefully. Families still gather as evening approaches. But something has shifted beneath it all. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that after the early Islamic conquests, Persian lands became part of a broader Islamic world governed by successive caliphates. Arabic emerged as the dominant language of administration and scholarship, and Islam gradually became the central religious framework. And yet as you move through this space, you begin to notice that something older is still present. It's not always visible at first. You hear it in the way people speak to one another in quieter moments. The rhythm of the language feels different from the formal words used in official settings. It carries echoes of earlier speech, something that has not disappeared. You begin to realize that Persian as a language is not fading away. It is changing. Over time, it adapts, incorporating elements of Arabic while maintaining its own structure and identity. This evolving form will later become what is known as New Persian, written in a different script, but still deeply connected to its past. One lesser-known detail becomes visible as you listen more closely. Persian did not simply survive as a spoken language. It re-emerged as a powerful literary language used in poetry, storytelling, and cultural expression. In some ways, it became even more influential than before, shaping intellectual and artistic life across a wide region. Yet this transformation raises questions. Some researchers question how intentional this cultural preservation was. Did people consciously work to maintain their language and identity, or did it persist naturally through everyday use and tradition? The answer is not entirely clear, and likely varies across communities. You continue walking through the city, noticing how different layers of identity exist side by side. Religious practices follow Islamic traditions. Public life reflects the structures of the broader Islamic world. But within homes, within conversations, within cultural expression, older elements continue to live. This creates a quiet duality. People are part of a new world, but they carry an older one within them. You pass by a gathering where poetry is being recited. The words flow with a softness that feels different from the formal language of administration. The listeners are attentive, drawn into the rhythm and meaning of the verses. This is not just entertainment, it's preservation. Language becomes a way of holding on to identity even as everything else changes. Scholars remain divided about how this balance between adaptation and continuity should be understood. Some view it as a form of resistance, a way of maintaining cultural identity under new political conditions. Others see it as a natural blending where cultures influence each other without clear boundaries. You begin to feel that both perspectives are present. There is intention, and there is evolution. As you move further, you notice how this blending extends beyond language. Architecture reflects both earlier Persian forms and newer influences. Clothing styles incorporate elements from different traditions. Food combines ingredients and techniques that have traveled across regions. The result is not a loss of identity, it is a transformation of it. You pause near a quiet courtyard as the light begins to soften again. The atmosphere feels calm, almost reflective. The world here is no longer defined by a single empire or a single belief system. It is shaped by layers, each one adding something new without fully erasing what came before. You think back to the earlier moments of your journey, the early communities shaped by language and shared culture, the rise of powerful empires, the blending of traditions under foreign rule. Each stage has added something changed, something carried, something forward. And now you stand in a world where identity is no longer simple. It is complex, layered, adaptive. You take a slow breath and listen to the quiet sounds around you. A language that has changed but not disappeared. A culture that has adapted but not been erased. A people who continue even as the structures around them shift. And as you continue forward, you begin to sense that this ability to adapt, to preserve while changing, will become one of the most important forces shaping what this land will eventually become. The world around you begins to feel more defined again, not in the sense of rigid control, but in the quiet emergence of something distinct, something that sets this land apart from others within the same broader world. You walk through a city where the rhythms of life feel familiar, yet there is a subtle shift in how people understand themselves. They are part of the Islamic world, but they are not exactly the same as those around them. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that over time, Persian lands developed a unique expression of Islam shaped by earlier traditions, cultural memory, and evolving political circumstances. This process did not happen quickly. It unfolded gradually across generations. You begin to notice how belief takes on a different tone here. The practices remain connected to the wider Islamic tradition, but there are nuances in interpretation, in emphasis, in the way stories are told and remembered. There is a depth of reflection that feels tied to something older, something carried forward from earlier centuries. One of the most significant developments in this transformation is the growing importance of Shia Islam in certain regions. At first, it is not dominant. It exists alongside other interpretations, part of a broader religious landscape that is still forming. One lesser-known detail becomes visible as you listen to conversations in quieter spaces. Early Shia communities often developed around a strong sense of loyalty to specific lineages and figures emphasizing themes of justice, leadership, and moral authority. These ideas resonated deeply with people who had long histories of structured leadership and spiritual reflection. Yet the path toward a distinct identity is not straightforward. Some researchers question how much of this development was driven by political conditions rather than purely theological differences. Alignments with particular interpretations of Islam could also serve as ways of expressing resistance or independence within larger systems of power. You move through a gathering where people speak in thoughtful, measured tones about leadership, about rightful authority, about the meaning of justice. These are not abstract ideas. They are deeply connected to lived experience, to the way people understand power and responsibility. You begin to feel how belief and identity are becoming intertwined once again, but in a new form. Earlier, you saw this connection in the Sasanian world where religion and kingship reinforced each other. Now the relationship is more complex. It is not only about supporting authority, it is also about questioning it, defining it, shaping it through interpretation. This creates a different kind of stability, not one based solely on structure, but one grounded in shared understanding and meaning. Scholars remain divided about how clearly defined this identity was during its early stages. Some suggest that distinction between different interpretations of Islam was still fluid, not yet forming the sharp boundaries that would appear later. Others argue that the foundations of a distinct Iranian religious identity were already taking shape. You begin to sense that identity here is not fixed. It is forming, slowly, layer by layer. As you walk through the city, you notice how this process affects daily life. Rituals are practiced with care. Stories are told with emphasis on moral lessons. Communities gather not only for worship but for reflection, for discussion, for shared understanding. There is a sense of inward focus, a depth that feels both personal and collective. You pause near a small group engaged in quiet conversation. Their words are not loud, but they carry weight. They speak of fairness, of leadership, of the responsibilities that come with power. These ideas are not new. They echo earlier traditions, but they are being expressed in new ways within a different framework. This is how identity evolves, not by abandoning what came before, but by reshaping it to fit new realities. As the light begins to soften once more, you take in the atmosphere around you. It feels steady but not rigid, defined but still developing. You think back to the beginning of your journey, when identity was shaped by language and shared culture without clear borders or structures. Now you stand in a world where identity includes belief interpretation and a growing sense of distinction within a larger system. The land has changed, the systems have changed, but something deeper continues to move forward, adapting, evolving, carrying the past into the present. And as you continue your journey, you begin to feel that this emerging identity will soon take a more visible form, shaping not only belief, but the very structure of the ethos itself, of course. The air feels heavier now, not with tension, but with accumulation. You walk through a world that has layered itself many times over. Nothing here is entirely new, and nothing is entirely unchanged. The patterns you have seen before continue, but they're becoming more structured, more deliberate, shaped by forces that are both political and spiritual at once. You begin to notice that power is no longer centered in a single unbroken line. Instead, it shifts between different dynasties, each rising, ruling and fading, leaving behind traces that blend into what comes next. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that after the early Islamic period, various dynasties emerged across Persian lands, some local, some connected to larger empires. These included groups such as the Samanids, the Buyids, and later the Seljuks. Each of them ruled in different ways, but all contributed to shaping the evolving identity of the region. You walk through a city under one of these dynasties. It feels alive with activity, but also with complexity. The rulers here follow Islamic governance, yet the cultural atmosphere remains deeply Persian. Administrative systems often use Persian alongside Arabic. Court life reflects traditions that stretch back centuries. Poetry, art, and scholarship flourish in ways that feel both new and familiar. One lesser-known detail begins to surface as you observe more closely. The Samanid dynasty, for example, played a crucial role in promoting Persian language and culture, supporting scholars and poets who helped revive Persian literary traditions after centuries of transformation. This cultural support was not always about resistance. It was also about identity, about shaping how people saw themselves within a broader world. Yet the political structure remains fluid. Some researchers question how stable these dynasties truly were. Power often shifted quickly, sometimes through conflict, sometimes through alliances, sometimes through internal struggles. What appears as a continuous history is often made up of many overlapping and competing authorities. You begin to feel this instability beneath the surface. In one part of the city, authority feels strong and organized. In another, it feels more uncertain, dependent on local leaders or changing loyalties. The sense of unity is present, but it is not always consistent. You pass through a court where officials and scholars gather. There is discussion, debate, the exchange of ideas. Knowledge is valued here, not just practical knowledge, but philosophical, scientific, and literary exploration. This is a world where learning becomes a form of power, shaping how people understand both themselves and the world around them. You notice how Persian language begins to take on a new role. It's no longer only a spoken tradition carried through daily life, and it becomes a language of expression, of poetry, of storytelling that captures emotion, identity, and memory. It carries forward older cultural elements while adapting to the new religious and political context. Scholars remain divided about how this cultural revival should be interpreted. Some view it as a conscious effort to preserve Persian identity within an Islami framework. Others see it as a natural evolution where language and culture adapt without a clear intention to resist or preserve. You begin to sense that both may be true. Human actions are rarely driven by a single purpose. As you continue walking, you notice how belief continues to shape this world. Islam remains central, but its expression varies. Different regions emphasize different interpretations. Religious leaders hold influence, but they do not always act in the same way. The relationship between faith and power is present, but not uniform. This creates a landscape that feels rich but also complex. You think back to earlier moments when systems felt more unified, more clearly defined. Now everything feels layered, interconnected, but also shifting. And yet there is something that continues through all of it. A sense of cultural continuity. Even as rulers change, even as political structures rise and fall, the deeper identity of the region continues to evolve without breaking. You pause near a quiet street as evening begins to settle. The sounds of the city soften. Conversations become quieter. The movement slows. You reflect on what you have seen. Power that shifts. Belief that adapts. Culture that endures. This is not a simple story of rise and fall. It is a continuous process, one that carries the past forward even as it moves into something new. And as you continue your journey, you begin to feel that this long period of layered change is preparing the ground for a moment when identity will become more sharply defined, once again shaping the future in ways that will be impossible to ignore. The layers you have been moving through begin to settle into something more focused again. You walk into a world where identity is no longer forming quietly beneath shifting dynasties, but is about to be shaped deliberately, almost decisively. The air carries a sense of direction now, as though many scattered threads are being gathered and tied together into a single visible pattern. You move toward a growing center of power where authority is becoming clearer, more unified. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that in the early 16th century, a new dynasty rose that would redefine the identity of this land in lasting ways. This was the Safavid Empire. As you step into one of its cities, the shift is immediate. The streets feel more organized, the presence of authority more visible. But more than that, there is a sense that something deeper is being shaped, something that goes beyond governance alone. The Safavids do not only seek to rule, they seek to define. You begin to hear it in the way people speak about belief. Shia Islam, which you encountered earlier as one among several interpretations, is now becoming central, elevated to a defining feature of the state itself. It is no longer one voice among many. It is becoming the voice that shapes identity, law, and authority. This is a turning point. One lesser-known detail emerges as you observe more closely. The early Safavid rulers actively promoted Shia Islam, sometimes encouraging its adoption through education and persuasion, and at times through more forceful means. This process was not always smooth. In some regions, populations that had followed other interpretations had to adjust this new religious structure. Yet the transformation goes beyond religion. You notice how this shift creates a stronger sense of distinction. The land you are walking through begins to feel more clearly separate from its neighbours, many of whom follow different interpretations of Islam. Identity is no longer only internal. It is also defined in contrast to others. This distinction shapes politics. It shapes alliances. It shapes conflict. The conflict. Some researchers question how unified this transformation truly was across all regions. While the central authority strongly promoted Shia identity, the degree to which it was fully embraced by all communities likely varied. Change at this scale rarely moves evenly. You begin to feel this complexity as you move through different parts of the city. In one area, religious rituals reflect deep engagement with the new structure. In another, practices feel quieter, perhaps more adapted, perhaps still carrying traces of earlier traditions. And yet the direction is clear. A new identity is being established. You pass by a gathering where religious scholars speak with authority, guiding interpretation, shaping understanding. Their role is prominent, connected closely to the structure of power. Belief and governance are once again intertwined, but in a new form, one that draws from both earlier Persian traditions and the evolving Islamic framework. You think back to the Sasanian period where faith and kingship were closely linked. There is a similarity here, but also a difference. The structure now is not simply a revival of the past. It is a transformation of it. The past is present, but it has been reshaped to fit a new reality. Scholars remain divided about how intentional this identity building was. Some view it as a strategic move to unify the state and strengthen its position in a complex geopolitical landscape. Others see it as a genuine expression of belief that naturally became central over time. You begin to sense that both elements are intertwined. Power and belief rarely exist separately. As the day begins to soften, you take in the atmosphere around you. There is a sense of clarity here, a stronger definition of what it means to belong. Language, culture, and now religion are aligning in a way that feels more unified than before. This is no longer a layered identity that exists quietly beneath shifting rulers. It is a declared identity, a visible one, a defining Indian seasons. You pause and look across the city as the light fades. The journey you have taken from early tribes to empires to cultural adaptation has led to this moment where identity is being shaped with intention, with purpose. And as you continue forward, you begin to feel that this clarity, this strong sense of definition will bring both strength and tension, shaping the future in ways that will unfold slowly but powerfully. The clarity you felt begins to deepen, but it also brings a new kind of tension. You walk through a world that now knows more clearly what it is. The identity shaped under the Safavid Empire is no longer forming. It is established, reinforced, and carried forward with intention. And yet as you move through its streets, you begin to sense that defining identity so clearly also creates lines that were once less visible. The city feels unified, but not without contrast. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that the Safavid decision to establish Shia Islam as the official religion of the state set this region apart from many of its neighbours, particularly the Sunni Ottoman Empire to the west. This difference was not only theological, it became political, shaping alliances, rivalries, and conflicts across the region. You begin to feel this division not as a distant concept, but as something present in everyday life. You pass through a gathering where people speak with conviction about belief, about loyalty, about what it means to follow the right path. Their words carry certainty, but also an awareness that not everyone beyond their borders shares the same view. This awareness creates a boundary, not always visible, but always present. One lesser-known detail emerges as you listen more closely. In some regions, the promotion of Shia identity involved public rituals that emphasize collective memory, particularly events tied to themes of sacrifice and justice. These rituals were not only spiritual, they helped create a shared emotional experience that strengthened community identity. Yet this strong sense of identity also brings complexity. Some researchers question how this shift affected populations that had long followed different traditions. While many adapted over time, the process may have involved tension, negotiation, and gradual change, rather than immediate acceptance. You move through a quieter part of the city where daily life continues with a familiar rhythm. People work, families gather, children learn. The larger identity of the state exists, but it is lived in different ways by different individuals. You begin to notice how identity operates on multiple levels. There is the identity defined by the state, clear and structured, and there is the identity lived by the individuals, shaped by family, local tradition and personal experience. These layers do not always align perfectly. Scholars remain divided about how cohesive Safavid society truly was. While official structures suggest strong unity, the lived reality may have been more varied with differences in belief practice and perspective across regions. You begin to feel this subtle variation as you walk. In one place, rituals are performed with strong communal participation. In another, they are quieter, more personal. In one conversation, belief is expressed with certainty. In another, it is discussed with reflection. This diversity does not raise the larger identity, but it adds depth to it. You think back to earlier moments in your journey when identity was fluid, shaped by language and shared culture without strong boundaries. Now, those boundaries are clearer. They define belonging, but they also define a difference. As the day moves forward, you begin to sense how this affects relationships beyond the city. Trade continues, but it is influenced by political and religious alignment. Diplomatic connections are shaped by shared or differing beliefs. Conflict becomes more likely where differences are strongest, and yet even within this environment exchange continues. Ideas move, goods travel, people adapt. The world does not divide completely. It remains connected even through its divisions. You pause at the edge of the city as the light begins to soften again. The landscape beyond stretches outward, connecting to other lands, other identities, other systems. You realize that the clarity you've been witnessing is both a source of strength and a source of tension. It gives people a strong sense of who they are, but it also creates lines that shape how they relate to others. You take a slow breath and look back at the city. It stands with confidence defined, structured, certain, and yet beneath that certainty there are layers of variation, adaptation, and quiet negotiation. As you turn to continue your journey, you begin to feel that this balance between unity and division will continue to shape what comes next, influencing not only the identity of this land, but also its place in a wider and ever-changing world. The clarity that once felt steady begins to loosen. You walk through a world that still carries the identity shaped by the Safavids, but something beneath it has begun to shift. The structures remain, the rituals continue, the sense of belonging is still present, and yet there is a quiet instability that moves through everything. It's not sudden, it builds slowly. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that by the late Safavid period, internal weaknesses had begun to emerge. Leadership became less consistent, administrative control weakened, external pressures increased. Over time, these factors contributed to the decline of Safavid power. But as you move through the city, you do not see decline as a single event. You feel it in subtle changes. You notice how authority is no longer as firm as it once was. Decisions take longer. Orders are not always followed with the same certainty. The system that once felt tightly connected now shows small gaps. You pass through a marketplace where trade continues but with a different tone. Conversations are more cautious. Prices shift more unpredictably. There is a sense that stability can no longer be fully relied upon. One lesser-known detail becomes visible as you listen more closely. In some parts of the empire, local leaders began to assert more independence as central authority weakened. This created a patchwork of power where different regions operated with varying degrees of control and loyalty. Yet this decentralization does not immediately collapse the system. It creates a slow fragmentation. Some researchers question whether this period should be seen primarily as decline or as transformation. While the central power weakened, local systems adapted, finding ways to maintain order within their own regions. The picture is not entirely one of collapse. You continue walking and begin to notice how people respond to this changing environment. Some hold tightly to established structures, continuing rituals and practices as a way of maintaining stability. Others begin to adjust, finding new ways to navigate uncertainty, forming new connections, relying more on local networks than distant authority. This creates a subtle shift in how identity is experienced. The larger identity of the state remains, but it feels less immediate, less present in daily life. Local identity begins to grow stronger again. You think back to earlier moments in your journey when identity was shaped by smaller communities before large empires unified them. There is a quiet return to that pattern, though not in the same way. This is not a return to the past. It is a response to the present. Scholars remain divided about how sudden the Safavid collapse truly was. While certain events accelerated the decline, the underlying changes had been developing over time. What appears as a sudden fall may have been the result of long-building pressures. You pause near a group of people gathered in quiet discussion. Their voices are low but focused. They speak of leadership, of uncertainty of the future. There is no panic, but there is awareness. You begin to sense that this moment is not only about loss, it is also about transition. As the day begins to fade, the city takes on a softer tone. The structures still stand, the identity still exists, but the sense of certainty that once defined this world has begun to dissolve. You look around and realize that this is how change often happens. Not through sudden collapse, but through gradual weakening, through small shifts that accumulate until something new begins to take shape. You take a slow breath and continue forward. The world you have been walking through is not ending, it is transforming once again, and as you move into the next stage of your journey, you begin to feel that this period of instability will open the way for new powers, new influences, and new challenges that will reshape the identity of this land in ways that are both familiar and entirely new. The instability does not remain quiet for long. You walk into a world where the balance has shifted more visibly now. The structures that once held everything together have loosened, and in their place new forces begin to emerge, trying to shape order from uncertainty. The land feels familiar, but the direction is no longer clear. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that by the late 18th century, a new dynasty rose to power in this region known as the Qajar dynasty. It did not inherit a perfectly stable system. Instead, it took shape within a landscape already marked by fragmentation, competing interests, and shifting loyalties. You move through a city under Qajar rule. The atmosphere feels different from what you experienced before. Authority is present, but it does not feel as deeply rooted. There is a sense of effort of trying to maintain control rather than naturally holding it. The rulers seek to unify the land again, but the conditions are not the same as in earlier periods. You pass through a gathering where officials speak in measured tones about governance, about maintaining order across regions that do not always respond consistently. The challenge is not only external, it is internal, woven into the structure of the state itself. One lesser-known detail begins to surface as you observe more closely. The Qajar rulers often relied on a combination of tribal alliances and local power structures to maintain authority. This created a system where loyalty was negotiated rather than fully centralized, making governance more complex and sometimes unstable. Yet this is not the only pressure shaping this world. As you continue walking, you begin to sense something new entering the landscape: foreign presence. It is not immediately obvious, but it appears in subtle ways. Goods in the marketplace that come from distant lands. Conversations that reference powers far beyond this region. Advisors and influences that feel external to the traditions you have been following. This is a significant shift. Some researchers question how much control the Qajar rulers truly had over their own territory, given the increasing influence of external powers. While the state maintained formal authority, decisions were often shaped by pressures that extended beyond its borders. You begin to feel this tension more clearly. The land is still itself, but it is no longer isolated. You walk through a marketplace where traders speak of Russia to the north and Britain to the south. These are not just distant places. They are active forces competing for influence, shaping trade politics and even internal decisions. The world is becoming more connected, but also more contested. Scholars remain divided about how this period should be understood. Some view it as a time of decline where external influence weakened the state and limited its independence. Others see it as a period of transition where the region was being drawn into a new global system with both challenges and opportunities. You begin to sense that both perspectives exist together. There is loss of control, but there is also adaptation. As you move through the city, you notice how everyday life continues within this shifting environment. People still work, families still gather, traditions still persist, and yet there is a growing awareness of forces beyond the immediate world. You pause near a group of people engaged in quiet conversation. They speak of trade agreements, of political decisions, of changes that seem distant but have real effects on their lives. The scale of awareness is expanding. You think back to earlier moments when the world felt more contained, more defined by local and regional structures. Now the boundaries are expanding, connecting this land to a much larger global context. This changes everything. Identity is no longer shaped only by internal developments. It's influenced by external forces as well. As the light begins to soften once more, you take in the atmosphere around you. It feels uncertain but not without direction. The Qajar world is trying to hold together what remains while also navigating a new reality that cannot be ignored. You take a slow breath and look across the city. It stands between past and future, between tradition and change, between internal identity and external pressure. And as you continue forward, you begin to feel that this tension will only grow stronger, leading to moments where people begin to question not only how they are governed, but what kind of future they want to shape for themselves. The pressure you have been sensing begins to take on a clearer shape. You walk through the same streets, but now the presence of outside influence feels less subtle. It is no longer just in the goods that arrive or the conversations that drift through the air. It is in decisions and agreements in the direction the land itself is being pulled. The world is closing in. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that during the 19th century, the lands ruled by the Qajar dynasty became a focal point of competition between two major powers, the Russian Empire and the British Empire. This period is often described as part of a larger geopolitical struggle known as the Great Game. You begin to feel this competition not as distant diplomacy, but as something that shapes everyday reality. You pass through a gathering where officials speak carefully, choosing their words with precision. Agreements are being discussed, but they do not feel entirely within local control. There is a sense that decisions are influenced by forces that sit beyond the room. This is a different kind of power, not direct conquest, but influence. You notice how this influence appears in small but significant ways. Trade routes are adjusted, economic priorities shift. Certain regions gain importance because of their strategic position. Others are affected by agreements made far away. One lesser-known detail begins to emerge as you listen more closely. Concessions granted to foreign powers such as rights to resources or infrastructure projects often gave these external actors significant control over parts of the economy. These agreements could shape the daily lives of people in ways that were not always immediately visible. Yet the impact becomes clearer over time. Some researchers question how voluntary these agreements truly were. While they were often presented as formal arrangements, the imbalance of power between local rulers and global empires suggests that pressure played a significant role in shaping these outcomes. You walk through a marketplace that feels more connected than ever before. Goods arrive from distant places with increasing frequency. Prices fluctuate based on forces beyond local supply and demand. Traders speak of markets that exist far beyond the horizon, influencing the value of what is sold here. This is a new kind of connection. It brings opportunity, but it also brings vulnerability. You begin to notice how people respond to this changing environment. Some adapt, finding ways to benefit from new trade opportunities, building connections that extend beyond the region. Others grow more cautious, concerned about the loss of control about decisions being made without their involvement. This creates a subtle tension within society, a sense that the direction of the future is not entirely in local hands. Scholars remain divided about how this period should be interpreted. Some view it as a time of exploitation where external powers took advantage of a weakened state. Others see it as part of a broader process of globalization where regions became interconnected in ways that reshaped economies and societies. You begin to feel both perspectives as you walk. There is a loss of independence, but there is also an expansion of awareness. The world is no longer distant. It is present. You pause near a group of people discussing recent developments. Their voices carry a mix of curiosity and concern. They speak of foreign advisors, of new technologies, of agreements that promise progress, but also raise questions. You begin to sense that something deeper is beginning to form, not just awareness of external pressure, but a reaction to it, a questioning, a desire to understand and perhaps to change the direction of things. As the day begins to fade, the city takes on a quieter tone. The activity slows, but the underlying tension remains. You look around and realize that this moment is not only about foreign influence, it is about how people respond to it, how they interpret it, how they decide what it means for their future. You take a slow breath and continue forward. The pressure is no longer distant. It is here, and it is beginning to shape the thoughts, the choices, and the identity of the people who live within it. The pressure does not only exist in distant agreements or quiet conversations among officials. You begin to feel it more clearly in the lives of ordinary people. You walk through the same streets, but now you pay closer attention to the details that might have seemed small before. The cost of goods, the availability of work, the subtle changes in how people speak about their future. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that during the later Qajar period, Economic difficulties increased for many ordinary people. Inflation, uneven trade conditions, and reliance on foreign concessions affected local industries and daily life in ways that were often difficult to control. You pass through a marketplace where the atmosphere feels more strained than before. Prices are discussed with concern, buyers hesitate, sellers negotiate more carefully. The balance that once felt steady now shifts more unpredictably. One lesser known detail becomes visible as you observe more closely. Imported goods, often cheaper due to foreign industrial production, began to compete with local craftsmanship. This affected artisans who had long relied on traditional methods, forcing them to adapt or struggle to maintain their livelihoods. You stop near a small workshop. An artisan sits quietly working with skill that has been passed down through generations. The movements are precise, practiced, almost instinctive. And yet there is a sense of uncertainty in the air, as if this way of life is no longer as secure as it once was. Some researchers question how widespread these economic pressures were across different regions. While urban centres often felt the effects more sharply, rural areas may have experienced them differently, depending on local conditions and resources. You begin to sense that even within shared challenges, experiences vary. You continue walking and notice how families adapt. Some take on additional work, some change their trade, some rely more heavily on community support. The responses are practical, grounded, shaped by necessity rather than ideology. And yet beneath these daily adjustments, something deeper is forming: awareness. You hear it in conversations that move beyond immediate concerns. People speak not only about prices or work, but about fairness, about decisions being made elsewhere, about the direction of the country itself. This is a shift. Earlier life was shaped by systems that felt distant but stable. Now those systems feel closer, more present, and more open to question. Scholars remain divided about how quickly this awareness spread among different social groups. Some suggest it developed gradually, building over time through shared experiences. Others argue that certain events accelerated it, bringing underlying concerns into sharper focus. You begin to feel that awareness rarely appears suddenly. It grows, quietly, through repeated experiences that begin to connect. You pass by a group gathered in discussion. Their voices are calm but engaged. They speak of reform, of change, of the possibility that things could be different. This is not yet a movement, but it is the beginning of one. You think back to earlier moments in your journey, when identity was shaped by language, by belief, by empire. Now it is beginning to include something new, a sense of participation, a sense that people might have a role in shaping their own futures. As the day moves forward, you notice how this idea exists alongside daily life. People still work. They still care for their families. They still follow traditions. But now there is an added layer, a quiet questioning. You pause near the edge of the marketplace as the light begins to soften. The sounds around you fade into a gentle background, and you reflect on what you have seen. Change does not only come from rulers or external powers. It also comes from within, from the thoughts of ordinary people, from their experiences, from their growing awareness of the world around them. You take a slow breath and continue forward. The pressure you felt earlier is no longer just external. It has begun to take root inside the society itself. And as you move into the next stage of your journey, you begin to feel that this awareness will soon gather into something more visible, something that will begin to reshape the structure of power itself. The awareness you have been sensing no longer stays quiet. It begins to gather. You walk through the same streets, but now the conversations feel more focused, more connected. What were once isolated concerns about prices, work, or fairness are starting to form into something larger. People are no longer only reacting to change. They are beginning to think about shaping it. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, growing dissatisfaction within Qajar Iran led to increasing calls for reform. These calls came from different parts of society, including merchants, intellectuals, religious figures, and ordinary citizens. You begin to feel this shift as you move through a crowded space where people are gathered more closely than before. Their voices are still calm, but there is a new intensity. They speak about justice, about accountability, about the idea that power should not exist without limits. This is something new. Not entirely new in thought, but new in new expression. One lesser-known detail begins to surface as you listen more carefully. Early reform movements were often supported by groups such as bazaar merchants who were directly affected by economic changes and foreign influence. Their role was not only economic, they became important voices in shaping public opinion and pushing for change. You begin to notice how different groups are starting to connect. Merchants speak with scholars. Religious leaders engage with intellectuals. Ordinary people listen, discuss, and share ideas. This creates a network of thought that moves through society, not formally organized, but clearly present. Some researchers question how unified these early reform efforts truly were. While many groups shared concerns, their goals were not always identical. Some sought economic stability, others focused on political reform. Others emphasized moral or religious considerations, and yet despite these differences, something brings them together. A shared sense that the current system is not enough. You walk through a quieter street where smaller groups gather in conversation. There is a feeling of cautious hope. People are not speaking loudly. They are not acting dramatically, but they are thinking, and that thinking is spreading. You begin to sense how ideas move, not in sudden bursts, but through repeated conversations, through shared experiences, through moments where individuals realize that others feel the same way. This is how awareness becomes collective. Scholars remain divided about how quickly this transition from awareness to action occurred. Some suggest it developed gradually over many years, while others point to specific moments that accelerated the process, bringing underlying tensions to the surface more rapidly. You begin to feel that both patterns are present. Slow build, sudden shift. As you continue walking, you notice how the atmosphere has changed. It's not tense in the sense of immediate conflict, but it is charged with possibility. People are beginning to imagine alternatives, different ways of organizing power, different ways of defining authority. You pass by a gathering where someone speaks quietly but clearly about the idea of law, not as something imposed from above, but as something that could guide everyone, including those in power. This idea feels significant. It introduces a new way of thinking. Power is no longer seen as absolute. It can be structured, limited, defined. You pause and reflect on this. Earlier in your journey, power was tied to kingship, to divine authority, to empire. Now it is beginning to be questioned, not rejected entirely, but reimagined. You think back to the farmers, the artisans, the traders you saw earlier. Their lives were shaped by systems they did not control. Now there is a growing sense that those systems might be open to change. You begin to understand that this moment is not yet a revolution. It is something quieter, but equally important. It is the moment when people begin to believe that change is possible. As the light begins to soften again, you look around at the group still gathered in conversation. The city feels the same, and yet it feels different. There is movement beneath the surface, ideas connecting, voices aligning. You take a slow breath and continue forward. The awareness that once existed quietly within individuals is becoming something shared. And as you move into the next stage of your journey, you begin to feel that this shared awareness will soon take form in ways that will reshape not only the structure of power, but the identity of the nation itself. The quiet conversations begin to take form. You walk into a city that feels the same at first glance, but as you listen more closely, the tone has shifted. The ideas that once moved quietly between small groups are now being spoken more openly. The sense of possibility has grown stronger, more visible. Something is beginning. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that in the early 20th century, these growing demands for reform led to what is known as the Persian Constitutional Revolution. It was one of the first major attempts in the region to establish a system of governance based on law representation and limits on royal authority. You feel the energy of this moment as you move through a crowded street. People gather in larger numbers now. Their voices are still measured, but there is a new clarity. They are not only discussing change, they are asking for it. You pass by a group standing near a building where decisions are being made. Their presence is calm but determined. They are not there to observe. They are there to influence. One lesser-known detail begins to surface as you listen more closely. In some cases, religious spaces such as mosques became important centers for organizing and discussing reform, providing both a physical and symbolic space where people could gather and express their concerns. This connection between belief and political action adds another layer to what you're witnessing. The movement is not driven by a single group. It is shaped by many voices: merchants, scholars, religious leaders, ordinary people. Each brings a different perspective, but they share a common direction. Yet the process is not as simple. Some researchers question how unified these demands truly were. While many supported the idea of a constitution, there were differences in how it should be structured, how much power should be limited, and what role tradition should play in this new system. You begin to feel this complexity as you move through different gatherings. In one place, the focus is on limiting royal authority. In another, the emphasis is on justice and fairness in economic matters. In another, discussions center on how to balance tradition with new forms of governance. This is not a single movement. It is a convergence. Scholars remain divided about how stable this new system was from the beginning. While the establishment of a constitution marked a significant shift, the challenges of implementing it in practice were considerable. Power structures do not change easily, and resistance often follows. You notice this tension as you walk. There are moments of progress and moments of hesitation. Decisions are made and then questioned. The energy of change is present, but is not always smooth. You pass by a building where representatives gather to discuss laws. This is something new, a space where decisions are meant to be shared, debated, structured. The idea of governance is changing. It is no longer only about authority. It is about participation. You pause for a moment and take in the atmosphere. It feels active, engaged, hopeful but cautious. You think back to earlier moments in your journey when power was held firmly by kings, by empires, by structures that did not invite participation. Now there is an attempt to redefine that relationship, to create a system where authority is balanced, where law applies more broadly, where people have a voice. You begin to understand how significant this moment is. It is not just a political change. It's a shift in how people see themselves, not only as subjects, but as participants. As the day begins to soften again, the city carries a different kind of energy. It's not calm in the same way as before, but it is not chaotic either. It is in motion. Ideas are being tested. Structures are being formed. The future feels uncertain but also open. You take a slow breath and continue forward. The movement that began with quiet awareness has now taken shape, and as you move into the next stage of your journey, you begin to feel that this attempt to reshape power will lead to even more profound changes as new leaders emerge and new visions for the future begin to take hold. The movement does not settle into a steady path. Instead, it begins to shift again, shaped by new forces, new personalities, and new visions of what the future should look like. You walk through a world that has tasted the idea of shared power, but has not yet fully stabilized around it. There is a sense that something stronger is about to take hold. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that in the early 20th century, a military figure named Reza Shah rose to prominence and eventually established a new ruling dynasty. His leadership marked a decisive shift towards centralization, modernization, and stronger state control. You move through a city that feels more ordered than before. The streets are being reshaped. Buildings are constructed with a different style reflecting new influences. There is a visible effort to create structure to impose clarity on a world that had felt uncertain. This is not the gradual change you saw earlier. It is deliberate, focused. You begin to notice how authority is reasserted. Decisions are made more directly, says. Institutions are reorganized. The state becomes more present in everyday life. One lesser-known detail becomes visible as you observe more closely. Reza Shah introduced reforms aimed at reducing the power of traditional elites, including tribal leaders and certain religious authorities, in order to strengthen centralized control. This shift changed the balance of influence within society in ways that were both stabilizing and disruptive. You walk past a group of officials discussing infrastructure projects. Roads are being built, railways are planned, communication systems are expanding. These are not small changes. They are attempts to reshape the entire structure of the country. Yet this transformation is not without tension. Some researchers question whether the speed and force of these reforms created resistance among those who felt their traditions or positions were being challenged. While modernization brought new opportunities, it also disrupted established ways of life. You begin to feel this tension as you move through different parts of the city. In one area, there is excitement about progress, new opportunities, new systems. In another, there is quiet concern, a sense that something familiar is being lost. This dual experience becomes a defining feature of the moment: progress and disruption. Order and pressure. You think back to the earlier constitutional movement where people sought to shape power collectively. Now power feels more concentrated again, but directed toward a different goal. Modernization. You begin to understand that this is not a rejection of change. It is a different approach to it. Instead of gradual adaptation, change is being driven from the center. Scholars remain divided about how this period should be interpreted. Some view it as a necessary step toward building a modern state, creating infrastructure and institutions that would support long-term stability. Others see it as a move toward authoritarian control where power was consolidated at the expense of broader participation. You begin to feel that both interpretations exist within the same reality. The results are visible, but so are the tensions. As you continue walking, you notice how identity is being shaped once again. The focus shifts toward national unity, toward a shared sense of belonging that is defined not only by religion or tradition, but by the idea of a modern state. This introduces a new layer. Identity is no longer only historical or cultural. It is political, national. You pause near a newly constructed building as the light begins to soften. It stands as a symbol of this new direction. Strong, structured, forward-looking. And yet as you look more closely, you can still see the layers beneath it. The older traditions, the cultural memory, the identity that has evolved over centuries, they have not disappeared. They have been reshaped. You take a slow breath and continue forward. The world you're walking through is changing more rapidly now. The past is still present, but the future is being built with intention. And as you move into the next stage of your journey, you begin to feel that one of the most symbolic changes of all is about to take place, one that will redefine not only how others see this land, but how it sees itself. The changes you have been witnessing begin to take on a symbolic form. You walk through a world that is no longer only reshaping its systems, but also redefining how it presents itself to the outside. The streets feel more organized, the structures more deliberate, the direction more clearly guided. And now something even more fundamental begins to shift. A name. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that in 1935, under the rule of Reza Shah, the country formally requested that the international community refer to it as Iran rather than Persia. This was not the creation of a new name, but the official recognition of one that had long existed within the region itself. You pause as this realization settles. Iran. The word feels both new and ancient at the same time. It carries the meaning of land of the Aryans, a term connected to the early peoples you encountered at the very beginning of your journey. What was once a distant linguistic and cultural idea is now becoming a formal national identity. This is more than a change in terminology. It is a statement. One lesser-known detail emerges as you observe more closely. The name Persia had been used widely by outsiders, particularly in Europe, while Iran had long been used internally. The decision to emphasize Iran internationally reflected a desire to align external perception with internal identity. Yet the change is not without complexity. Some researchers question whether this shift was also influenced by broader political and cultural movements of the time, including efforts to emphasize ancient heritage and national unity in a rapidly changing world. The meaning of the name carries both historical depth and modern intention. You begin to feel how this moment connects past and present. Everything you have seen from early language and identity through empires and transformations now gathers into a single word: Iran. You walk through the city and notice how this shift is reflected in subtle ways. Official documents carry the new designation, conversations begin to adopt it more consistently. There is a sense of alignment, as though the identity of the land is becoming more clearly defined, both internally and externally, and yet the past does not disappear. The memory of Persia remains. It exists in cultural references and historical understanding and the way people still connect to earlier periods of their history. This creates a layered identity. Both names exist, both carry meaning. Scholars remain divided about how this change should be interpreted. I view it as a natural evolution, bringing external recognition in line with internal reality. Others see it as part of a broader effort to reshape national identity in a modern context, emphasizing certain aspects of the past while redefining others. You begin to sense that both perspectives are present. The name is not only about history, it is also about intention. As you continue walking, you notice how identity is becoming more unified, at least in appearance. The state presents itself with greater clarity. The idea of nation becomes more central. People begin to see themselves not only as part of local communities or historical traditions, but as part of a single national identity. This does not erase differences, but it frames them within a larger structure. You think back to the earliest moments of your journey, when identity was fluid, shaped by the language and shared culture without clear boundaries. Now it has become something more defined, more formal, more visible to the world. The transformation feels complete in one sense, and yet you know it is not. Because identity is never truly fixed, it continues to evolve. You pause as the light begins to soften again, looking out across the city that now carries this name, Iran. It feels grounded, rooted in the past, but also reaching toward the future. You take a slow breath and continue forward. The name has changed how the world sees this land, and perhaps how it sees itself. And as you move into the next stage of your journey, you begin to feel that beneath this clear identity, new tensions are already beginning to form, shaping a future that will once again challenge everything that has been built. The name settles into place, but the transformation does not stop there. You walk through a country that now calls itself Iran, carrying a sense of clarity and direction that feels new. The identity has been defined, the state has been strengthened. And yet as you move through its streets, you begin to sense that this new structure is still being built, still being tested. The pace of change continues. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that under the Pahlavi dynasty, especially during the reign of Reza Shah and later his son Muhammad, Reza Shah, Iran underwent rapid modernization. Infrastructure expanded, education systems developed, industry began to grow. The country was being reshaped to align more closely with modern global standards. You move through a city that reflects these changes clearly. Roads are wider. Buildings are constructed with new materials and designs. There is a visible effort to create a sense of progress, of forward movement. This is not the slow evolution you saw in earlier periods. It is fast, deliberate, and far-reaching. One lesser-known detail becomes visible as you observe more closely. The modernization efforts included reforms in clothing and public appearance, encouraging a shift towards styles that reflected Western influence. These changes were not only about aesthetics, they were part of a broader attempt to redefine how society presented itself. Yet this transformation is not experienced the same way by everyone. Some researchers question whether these changes were fully accepted across all parts of society. While some embraced the new opportunities and direction, others felt that traditions were being pushed aside too quickly, creating a sense of imbalance. You begin to feel this contrast as you move through different areas. In one part of the city, there is excitement. New schools, new technologies, new possibilities. In another, there is quiet discomfort, a sense that something familiar is being replaced. This creates a tension that is not always visible but always present. You pass by a group of people engaged in conversation. Their voices are calm but thoughtful. They speak of progress but also of identity, of what it means to move forward without losing connection to the past. This question feels central. How do you modernize without forgetting who you are? You think back to the long journey you have taken, the layers of identity, the balance between change and continuity. This moment feels like another version of that same pattern but intensified. The speed of change makes the balance harder to maintain. Scholars remain divided about how this period should be understood. Some view it as a necessary step toward building a strong modern nation capable of participating in a global system. Others see it as a period where rapid change created social and cultural tensions that were not fully resolved. You begin to sense that both perspectives exist within the same reality. Progress is visible, but so is pressure. As you continue walking, you notice how the state becomes more present in everyday life. Policies shape behavior. Institutions guide decisions. Authority feels more immediate, more involved. This creates a sense of order, but also a sense of control. You begin to understand that modernization is not only about building infrastructure, it is about shaping society. And shaping society involves choices. Choices about what to keep, what to change, what to leave behind. You pause near a busy street as the light begins to soften. The city moves with energy, with purpose. It feels alive with possibility. And yet beneath that energy there is a quiet question that continues to grow. Is this the right direction? Is this balance sustainable? You take a slow breath and look around. The answer is not clear, but the question itself is becoming more present. And as you continue forward, you begin to feel that this question will not remain quiet for long, that it will soon rise to the surface in ways that will reshape the country once again. The question does not remain in the background. It begins to move closer to the center of everything. You walk through a country that appears modern, organized, and forward-looking. Roads connect cities. Institutions operate with structure. The name Iran carries weight both within and beyond its borders. And yet beneath this surface, the tension you have been sensing continues to grow. It is no longer only about identity. It is about influence. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that during the mid-20th century, Iran became deeply entangled in global politics, particularly during and after the Second World War. Its strategic location and natural resources, especially oil, drew increasing attention from powerful nations. You begin to feel this global presence more clearly now. You pass through a space where foreign advisors' agreements and interests are no longer subtle. They are visible. Decisions are shaped not only within the country, but also through connections to larger global powers. One lesser-known detail becomes apparent as you listen more closely. During this period, external involvement in Iran's political affairs extended beyond economic influence, at times affecting leadership and governance in direct ways. These interventions left lasting impressions on how people understood power and sovereignty. Yet the experience of this influence is not uniform. Some researchers question whether global involvement brought opportunities for development and modernization, or whether it limited the country's ability to shape its own path. The impact appears complex, creating both advancement and dependence. You walk through a gathering where people speak with a tone that feels more urgent than before. They are no longer only discussing progress. They are questioning control. Who decides? Who benefits? Who leads? These questions carry weight. They are no longer quiet reflections. They are becoming central concerns. You begin to notice how this awareness spreads across different parts of society. Students discuss ideas of independence and reform. Workers speak of fairness and opportunity. Religious voices reflect on values and direction. The conversations are not identical, but they are connected. They are pointing towards something larger. Scholars remain divided about how unified these perspectives were. While dissatisfaction grew across different groups, their reasons and goals were not always the same. Some focused on political autonomy, others on economic fairness, others on cultural and religious identity. And yet despite these differences, there is a shared feeling. Something is not balanced. You move through the city and notice how the contrast between appearance and experience becomes more visible. The buildings stand strong. The systems function. But the sense of alignment between authority and people begins to weaken. This creates a quiet divide, not always as spoken, but deeply felt. You think back to earlier moments when power was either clearly held or clearly challenged. Now it exists in a more complicated space where influence is layered and responsibility is harder to define. You pause near a group gathered in thoughtful discussion. Their voices are calm but firm. They speak of the future, of change, of the possibility that the current direction cannot continue without adjustment. This is not yet a single movement, but it is becoming something more organized, more connected, more determined. As the day begins to fade, the city carries a different kind of energy. It is no longer only about progress. It is about direction, about control, about identity within a global context. You take a slow breath and look around. The world you are walking through feels on the edge of something, not sudden, but inevitable. The questions that have been growing cannot remain unanswered. And as you continue forward, you begin to feel that the next stage of this journey will not unfold quietly, but will rise with a force that reshapes everything once again. The edge you have been approaching finally becomes visible. You walk through a city that no longer feels balanced between quiet tension and outward stability. The tension has moved into the open now. It is no longer something sensed beneath conversations. It is present in the streets and the voices of people in the way the entire atmosphere seems to shift. Something is happening. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that in 1979, a major turning point reshaped the country completely. This was the Iranian Revolution, a movement that brought an end to the Pahlavi monarchy and established a new system based on religious leadership. You feel the energy of this moment as you move forward. Crowds gather, not chaotic, but focused. There is purpose in their movement. Voices rise not in anger alone, but in conviction. You walk among them feeling the intensity, the weight of what is unfolding. This is not a single event. It is the result of everything you have seen building over time. The question, the tensions, the sense of imbalance. All of it has gathered into this moment. One lesser-known detail begins to surface as you observe more closely. The revolution was not driven by a single group or ideology. It brought together a wide range of participants, including religious leaders, students, workers, and others, each with their own reasons for seeking change. This diversity made the movement powerful but also complex, yet the direction becomes clearer as events unfold. The leadership that emerges is centered around figures who emphasize religious authority, particularly within the framework of Shia Islam. The idea of governance shifts once again, returning to a model where belief and political power are closely connected. You begin to feel the scale of this transformation. The systems that were built during the period of modernization are being challenged. The identity that was shaped around progress and global alignment is being re-examined. The question is no longer how to modernize, it is how to define the country's direction. Some researchers question whether the revolution was inevitable given the pressures that had been building, or whether different choices could have led to a different outcome. The answer is not clear, shaped by many factors that converged at this moment. You move through the crowd and notice how people express their hopes. Some speak of justice, others of independence, others of returning to values they feel have been overlooked. These motivations are not identical, but they are aligned in their desire for change. Scholars remain divided about how unified these goals truly were. While the revolution succeeded in transforming the political system, the expectations of those involved were not always the same. This created a new set of challenges as the country moved forward. You begin to sense that this moment is both an ending and a beginning. The monarchy that once symbolized authority is no longer present. A new system takes its place, and with it a new expression of identity. You think back to earlier periods in your journey. The Sasanian world, where belief and power were deeply connected. The Safavid era, where identity was defined through religion. Now those patterns appear again, but in a modern context shaped by centuries of history that came before. You pause and look around. The city feels alive with movement, with voices, with change. It is not calm, but it is purposeful. As the light begins to soften, the intensity does not disappear. It remains carried forward into what comes next. You take a slow breath and continue. The transformation you are witnessing is not the end of the story. It is another beginning. And as you move into the final stage of your journey, you begin to feel that everything you have seen, every layer of history, every shift in identity is about to come together in a way that reveals not only what Iran has become, but why it continues to be shaped by its past. The movement begins to settle, not into silence, but into something quieter, something that carries the weight of everything you have seen. You walk through a world that now feels familiar again, not because it is simple, but because you understand how many layers exist beneath it. Iran. The name no longer feels like a single moment of change. It feels like a gathering of thousands of years of languages, beliefs, empires, and choices all woven together into something that continues to evolve. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that modern Iran is shaped by both its ancient heritage and its more recent transformations, including the system that emerged after the Iranian Revolution. Its identity reflects a combination of deep historical continuity and ongoing change. You walk slowly now, the pace of your journey softens. The streets carry echoes of everything you have experienced, in the language spoken around you, in the architecture that blends past and present, in the rituals that carry both ancient and modern meaning. You begin to notice how the past is never truly gone. It exists beneath the surface, shaping how people think, how they see the world, how they understand themselves. One lesser-known detail becomes visible as you reflect more deeply. Even today, many cultural practices, stories, and expressions in Iran carry influences that can be traced back thousands of years often, without people consciously recognizing their origins. Continuity does not always require awareness. It exists naturally, carried forward through habit and tradition, and yet the story is not fixed. Some researchers question how future generations will continue to interpret this identity. Will the balance between tradition and change remain the same, or will new forces reshape it again? History does not provide a final answer. It only shows patterns. You begin to feel those patterns now. Rise and fall, change and continuity, power and belief. Each period you have walked through has added something, reshaped, something carried something forward. Nothing has been completely lost. Nothing has remained exactly the same. You pause and look around one last time. The city feels calm, not because everything is resolved, but because everything continues. Scholars remain divided about how to define Iran's identity in a single way. Some emphasize its ancient roots, tracing continuity back to early Persian civilizations. Others focus on its Islamic identity, shaped over centuries of belief and interpretation. Others still highlight its modern political structure, influenced by global forces and internal transformation. You begin to understand that all of these perspectives are true at once. Identity is not one thing, it is many things existing together. As the light fades into evening, the atmosphere softens. The sounds of the city grow quieter. The movement slows. You feel the journey settling within you, from the early communities on the Iranian plateau, to the rise of empires, to the blending of cultures, to the shaping of belief, to the emergence of a modern nation. It has all been part of the same continuous story. And now, as you stand in the present, you realize that the question you began with does not have a simple answer. Persia did not suddenly become Iran. It slowly became something else while still carrying everything it had been. The name changed. The systems changed. The world changed. But the deeper identity continued, adapting, evolving, moving forward. You take a slow breath. The air feels calm now. The weight of history no longer feels heavy. It feels steady, as if everything has found its place within a larger flow. Your steps slow. The world around you softens, and the story which once felt vast and complex begins to settle into something quiet and continuous. You do not need to hold all of it at once. It is enough to know that it exists, that it continues, that it carries forward. The lights dim gently, the sounds fade, and you allow yourself to rest within the long unfolding story of a land that has never stopped becoming. As the night deepens, the edges of the world soften even more. The cities you walked through begin to feel distant, like quiet memories drifting beyond reach. The voices, the footsteps, the movement of history itself all begin to slow, becoming softer, gentler, less defined. You are no longer walking, you are simply present. The land stretches quietly around you, not as a place of conflict or change, but as a calm, endless horizon. The weight of time feels lighter now, no longer something to follow, but something to rest within. The past does not disappear. It settles like layers of sand beneath still air. Air, like echoes that no longer need to be heard to be understood. You breathe slowly, and with each breath the details fade just a little more. The empires, the names, the moments of tension and transformation, they all drift gently into the background, leaving behind only a sense of continuity. A quiet understanding that everything has been part of a single flowing story. The air feels still, the night feels deep, and you allow yourself to drift with it. There is nothing more to follow, nothing more to question, only the soft presence of a world that continues even as you rest. End of script, sweet dreams,